who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters. I'm always glad that when somebody asks me a question, if they actually take the opportunity to answer it for me first. How about you? The beautiful thing about somebody asking us a question and they take the opportunity to answer it before we even have to is because, of course, then we don't have to run the risk of being wrong. Because it's already been answered for us. Who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters is the question Jesus asks in today's gospel. And he answers it for the crowd that's gathered inside the house. And notice how he answers the question. He answers the question with his eyes. He asks, who are my mother and my brothers and my sisters? And then Mark tells us, he looked at those around him. He looked at those around him. And he said, you are my mother and my brothers and my sisters. Whoever does the will of God is mother and brother and sister to me. It's a good thing Jesus answered the question for them, because they and we would have gotten the answer wrong. Because the crowd would have said, your mother and your brother and your sisters, and you and I would have said it as well. Well, they're outside there calling and wanting you. But no, Jesus wants them to recognize that they are part of the family. And to be part of the family means that you and I are willing to do the will of God. It was a long driveway, and the driveway had an S-curve in it, and as the car came down the driveway, and it was remarkable because, of course, as we were taking one curve and then the other, weaving our way towards the yard of the house in which we were going, the door opened wide, and there was this elderly woman, and her name was Nellie. And Nellie stood in the door, and she was clapping. And the smile was from ear to ear. And as she smiled, she began to laugh as she continued to clap, and why, the car hadn't even come to a stop yet, and already she was out of the doorway, and she was coming down the driveway, and she was so eager to meet these people she had never met. Nellie was my grandfather's niece. She, now in her 80s, lives in the house that my grandfather was born and raised in over in the country of Belgium. And so when I and my sisters went there to pay my relatives a visit, why, here was this niece of my grandfather who had never met us, had never laid eyes on us, but yet knew that we were part of the family. And so there she stood in the doorway with a smile on her face, clapping and laughing and rushing out to the moving car. I share that image with you because it's an image of God that I carry with me. A God who includes every one of us as mother and brothers and sisters to him. It's as simple as doing the will of God. Oh, yes, we overcomplicate things. That's our nature as human beings. We make it much more difficult. We make it much more complicated than it needs to be. You and I simply belong to the will whenever we do the will of God. And isn't that what we want? Isn't that why you chose to take an hour out of your day today to come to this place, to this church, to be able to spend a few moments worshiping God? Isn't it because you want to be part of the crowd that is gathered in the house? Isn't it because you and I want to be part of that crowd that not only is gathered at the house, but actually has time to sit at the feet of Jesus and to eat with him? That's what we desire. That's what we want. We don't want to be left outside asking Jesus to come to us. No, we want to be with him in the house. How do we do it? We do the will of God. And that, my friends, is not complicated. Difficult? Yes, it is. But it's not complicated, because the will of God is the same for every single one of us gathered in this place tonight. It's the same for every human being that walks the face of the earth. The will of God is the exact same, whether you're married or single, whether you're a priest or a religious sister. The will of God is the same if you're a plumber or a teacher or a carpenter or you're simply retired. The will of God is the same for all of us. Love God. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. So this past week, I saw people doing God's will over and over again. I saw young people and adults here in this church for 4 days, gathering with our children, is celebrating the gift of God's love that comes in word and in song, and you're going to see it in a few moments, this opportunity that is called Vacation Bible School. I saw teenagers grabbing children by the hand who were afraid because, of course, mom and dad dropped them off and just left them here. And they wanted to cry. And the young people knew they were about to cry because the young people could probably remember they were in the same boat not that many years ago. And so these youth grabbed these children by the hand and started laughing with them and telling stories and welcoming them. And of course, they showed us what it means to belong to the will. It wasn't much after that I went up to the hospital. And every time I go to the hospital, I see these incredible men and women who serve as nurses and the dedication and the care. And so I walk down the hall and I see this nurse that is helping this elderly man on one side, and he's got his pole with a bag hanging from it on the other. And she's encouraging him. And she's telling him just a few more steps, and then we'll turn around and you can go back to your room. And as I watched her, I saw that she too belongs to the family, because she has chosen to do the will of God. Why, today I had the privilege of celebrating baptism of the twins that I spoke about last weekend. And I had the opportunity to celebrate the gift of marriage this afternoon with a young couple. And as I watched these young people express their love for one another through the marriage vows, and as I saw this young couple bring their children to the waters of baptism and the deep love, abiding love that they have for these children, why, I watched these actions take place, and I stood in humble service and in gratitude for a God who has called them to be part of his family, and they responded because they chose to do God's will. My friends in Christ, we want to belong to the will. We need to belong to the will. And the way it happens is we do the will of God, and we become family.